So I think it's pretty common knowledge that having the right people on your team greatly accelerates your results. And not having the right people on your team actually slows you down. It can stop you completely. But the challenge here is that although it's common knowledge, it's not always practiced. In fact, it's not practiced very often at all. A lot of the times we have the wrong people in the wrong roles or just completely the wrong people within the organization. So if you're a business leader, this is something that you need to pay attention to. And you also need to pay attention to this in your personal life because you have a partnership with people around you, whether that's your spouse, if it's a sibling, whether it's a parent or a friend, whatever that is, you have partnerships in all aspects of your life. And people who are the right fit for those partnerships will help you get to where you want to be. They'll make your life a lot easier. They'll make it a lot more fulfilling and joyful. Having the wrong people is going to make things a lot more challenging. Now, there's nothing wrong with things being challenging because that's what enables you to grow. If you are expecting things to be perfect all the time, it's not going to happen. In fact, challenges are good. But if you continuously have the same challenge with the same individual in your business or in your personal life and you don't address it, it's going to become a bigger and bigger problem. And that's essentially what we are talking about here. But there's one key characteristic or one key trait that is more important than anything else when it comes to a partnership, with anything else when it comes to performance. It is accountability. So in the business world, you need to have people that are accountable. And there's different layers of accountability. In fact, there's 4 layers. And again, this applies to your personal life as well. You need to be in a partnership, whether it's a marriage or whatever other relationships you have, with people who are accountable. And these are the 4 things to pay attention to, because if these 4 layers of accountability are not there, you're going to be challenged and you're going to constantly have to babysit these individuals. And at some point in time, you're going to have to make a decision whether that person is a right fit or not. Now, I have a personal motto, and this doesn't always work, but I always try to get into relationships, whether it's a business relationship or a personal relationship, with people who are accountable. Anybody who is not accountable, I'm very wary of because the results typically aren't there. These individuals, you can't really rely on all the time. And a lot of times you have to babysit them and it becomes a bigger pain than actually a solution. And you want people in your life that add to your life, not necessarily take away from your life. So here are the 4 things to pay attention to, the 4 layers of accountability. The first one is self-accountability. If the person is not accountable to themselves, you're going to have a challenge. Now, one thing to pay attention to is this also applies to you as an individual. So if you are missing any one of these layers of accountability, then it's time to do some self-reflection. So self-accountability is beyond the most important thing. If a person is self-accountable, if they hold themselves to the highest standard and always do what they say they're going to do, you got the right person on your team. Because most likely, the other 3 layers of accountability aren't going to be a challenge. But when someone says something to themselves and they don't hold themselves accountable for not doing it, that becomes a bigger challenge. And this is actually very, very common. We all miss deadlines. We all have these habits that we want to change. We all do things that sometimes we're not very proud of or we know we could do differently. But if these patterns become bigger and bigger, more frequent and more consistent, it becomes a problem in our life and it becomes a problem in our business. So the whole point here is that the more you are accountable to yourself, the more likely you are to continue to be accountable with yourself and other people and get the results that you're looking for. So the second layer is accountability to your teammates. So if the people on your team are accountable to each other, that's another layer of accountability. And they absolutely should be. Sometimes one of the challenges that happens is the person may not be accountable to their teammates. They may not just like it. Why? Because they might have a perception or a belief that I'm not accountable to you. I'm just accountable to my manager. And that is not a great place to be for that individual. It's not a great place to be for you to have that person on your team. Everybody wants a person on their team that is accountable to the teammates. because that adds a completely different layer. And when you have that accountability, the team gets stronger as well. When you have someone on your team who's not accountable to the teammates, the team actually falls apart. So you got to be very wary of that as well. And the third layer of accountability is with your manager. So if that person is accountable to their manager, then they have that extra layer of accountability. And so this is typical. This isn't something that's missing. Sometimes it is for individuals, but most people are accountable to their manager because their manager has a direct, you can say, influence on that person's compensation or whether that person works there or not. So if someone is reporting to you, you have a strong, you can say, degree of influence on that individual, and they're more likely or most likely to be accountable to you. So this one typically isn't a problem, this layer. And the fourth layer then is accountability to the organization. And the organization, so in the business, what are the values of the organization? What are the principles of the organization? What are the expectations of the organization? What's the culture of the organization? And does this person on your team, or do the people on your team, are they accountable to the organizational values and principles? Do they live up to those standards? Because if they don't, that's going to cause a challenge as well. Because when one person is not living up to those standards, someone else sees that and they say, well, that person's not doing it. Why should I? And then you have the weakest link becoming a series of weak links. And you don't want that. You want to be able to crush that immediately and get rid of that weakest link or fix that weak link, because you get what you tolerate, and that weak link will actually spread. Now, this happens in your personal life as well, because as a family, you should have values. If you haven't sat down and actually created your family values, you should. This is an inclusive exercise, which means that you should bring everybody in your family, whether that's your wife or your kids or whoever it may be, and talk about your family values. And if your family members are not living up or being accountable to those family values, then you need to address it as a family. It's very, very important that you do so. And it's very important to be able to modify and change those values based on the individuals within your family. Every time you get a new family member come in, your values may change. You can't be completely strict and say, those are the family values we're going to hold and that's it. Everybody has to have a part to play in the family values, and everybody needs to be in agreement to be held accountable to those family values. It's very important. Otherwise, you have things fall through the cracks. You have people not believing in the family values, and then the whole thing falls apart. So why am I expressing this? Why is this so important? Out of all the traits that I have seen, all the characteristics that I've seen with people who are successful and people who are not as successful, there's a common thread and there is a common denominator. And accountability is on the top of the list. Those who are successful, those who have successful businesses, have people on their team who are accountable. Those who are successful in their personal life are accountable, and they have people in their family, or they have relationships with people who are accountable on all four of those layers. So accountability isn't just one simple thing. There's four layers to it. Again, it's self-accountability. There's accountability to your teammates. There's accountability to your manager. And then there's accountability to the organization, whether it's a business or your family. If you have those four layers of accountability in the individuals that are on your team, you have a great team player.